Hello, so today I am going to model how you might take a step-by-step procedure from a traditional cookbook type lab and convert it into a procedure that would be acceptable for a lab report. The procedure I'm using is from the Density of Aluminum lab, which is one that I do toward the beginning of the school year, usually in the first unit. The procedure is pretty simple: obtaining a sample of aluminum and getting the mass of that sample and then getting the volume of each sample. Now, water displacement is used for the volume measurements, so that's going to be an important note that needs to make its way into our actual procedure. So starting with the procedure that is written has to be written for a scientific audience, which means it's going to be past tense, passive voice, third person. There's no reference to the experimenter at all, because what a scientific audience is going to be interested in is more about how the data was obtained and not who actually obtained the data. So we're going to start here looking at these first three steps. They seem to be related. So let's see. A sample of aluminum discs was obtained and divided into three smaller sample groups labeled A, B, and C. Okay, so I've taken care of steps 1, 2, and 3. Now I'm looking at 4 and 5. Now step 4 seems to be distinct from step 5, so I'll address that first. Measure the mass of each sample. So we'll say each sample group was massed and the mass recorded. Now you could also say here, refer to this for each an individual trial. So you could say instead that sample group A was massed and the mass recorded. Moving on now to step 5, which is the water displacement step. Notice that there's a number of details here. Not all of those details are actually going to make it into the lab procedure itself. Remember, in a procedure, you're actually writing for a scientific audience. It is assumed that a scientific audience knows how to use water displacement to obtain a volume. So here we go, turning step 5 into a procedure. So a graduated cylinder was filled about halfway with water and the volume recorded. Sample A, now notice here, because of the change I made here, rather than talking about all of the groups and at once and only talking about group A, then I needed to make that same change here as I was talking about obtaining the volume of that sample. So sample A was carefully added to the graduated cylinder with water and the new volume recorded. Great, so I've dealt with step 5. Now, I could be done if I had had each of these sentences referring to all of the sample groups. However, I didn't, so I need to add another sentence about the same procedure was repeated with the remaining sample groups. Okay, that takes care of everything. Notice here that I do not include the when finished carefully recover metal sample blah 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 blah. The reason I'm not including that is that that's not data. The procedure is simply about the data that goes into the data table. Also notice that in here is nothing about the actual density, because density is something that has to be calculated. Procedures are simply about the measurements, how we got to the measurements and the observations, not how we got to the final conclusions. I hope you found this helpful.